that moment when something inside you awakens, as if an ancient truth finally finds space to be heard? That's exactly how it was for me. I wasn't in a temple nor reading a sacred book. I was just sitting, tired, in silence. And suddenly, I realized that the greatest enemy in my life was never time, fate, or people. It was myself. All the times I accepted less than I deserved, that I remained silent when I should have spoken, that I called humility what was in fact fear. For many years, I thought that being a good person was enough. I believed that if I was kind, the world would reciprocate, that if I gave of myself, life would return love. But there's a detail that nobody told me. When you always put yourself second, the universe understands that's your place. And so little by little you disappear. I remember my grandfather. He had that kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books, but from the perspective of someone who has lived too long. One day he told me something simple while we were drinking tea. If you don't respect yourself, the world won't respect you either. I was 20 years old. I laughed. I thought he was talking about pride, vanity, an ego that needed to be controlled, and I replied, "The important thing is to help others, to be good, not to create conflict." He just smiled, as if he knows that time will teach me what words cannot yet express. Today, when I remember that conversation, I realize how patient life is. It tries to teach us with signs, with small disappointments, with subtle discomforts. But when we insist on not listening, it uses pain as its last teacher. I needed to lose in order to understand, to lose things, people, and even my sense of purpose. There was a time when everything collapsed at once. The work I endured silently, believing it was better than nothing, suddenly ended. The people I helped the most vanished as if they had never existed. And the most painful thing was realizing that I wasn't just alone. I was empty. I looked around and realized that everything I had built was made of compromises. Every choice came from an attempt to be accepted, not to be true to myself. It was in that void that a memory returned with force. My grandfather's voice and his forgotten phrase, "The world treats you as you treat yourself." I repeated it softly, several times, and for the first time, I realized it wasn't philosophy. It was a mirror. Everything that happened to me reflected my own value system. When I accepted being ignored, I taught people to ignore me. When I remained silent in the face of injustice, I trained the world to believe I had no voice. And then I started to wonder, why is it so hard to believe that we are worthy? Why do we feel guilty when we set boundaries? Why do we call the simple act of protecting ourselves selfishness? Perhaps because we grew up hearing that love is sacrifice, that good is what endures, that noble is what silently endures, but no one explained to us that love without respect becomes submission, and that boundless kindness becomes self-effacement. The truth is, the world isn't cruel, it's precise. It simply gives back what you give. If you shrink, it crushes you. If you rise, it recognizes you. Everything starts within. No external miracle can compensate for the absence of inner worth. This realization changed the way I looked at everything. I remembered every moment I swallowed words, every time I accepted crumbs, every time I apologized for dreaming big. And I realized it wasn't fate testing me. It was me putting myself in the supporting role of my own story. Life simply followed the script I silently wrote. There's an old saying, hidden in many traditions, man is made in the image of the Creator. When I was young, I found it poetic. Today, I understand the weight that this phrase carries. If there is something divine within us, then to disrespect oneself is to disrespect that which is sacred within you. Life does not reward those who diminish themselves. It rewards those who honor the gift of existence. But what does self-respect actually mean? It's not about putting on armor and becoming cold. It's simply learning to say, enough, when your heart is already screaming in silence. It's looking in the mirror and recognizing someone there who deserves rest, love, dignity. It's stopping making excuses for feeling, for needing, for existing. Perhaps that is true humility, recognizing that there is something within us that is worth nurturing. that the same breath that animates the universe pulsates within each of us. And when you forget this, the world doesn't take long to remind you, but in its own way, with absences, with silences, with falls. Sometimes you have to break down to see your own worth. And when life broke me, I finally realized I wasn't living, I was just enduring. That was the turning point. And perhaps that's why you're hearing these words now. Because at some point along your journey, you too began to feel that something inside you no longer fits the role the world gave you. The first step is simple, but it requires courage. To look inside without masks and ask yourself, do I truly respect myself, or am I just trying to be accepted? This question is like a seed. When it falls on the right ground, it germinates and changes everything. But be warned, the answer doesn't come easily. It comes gradually and almost always, along with the pain. Mine arrived like this, silent, inevitable, transformative, and it was in that instant, between the end of who I was and the beginning of who I didn't yet know how to be, that the true learning began. Because life has a curious way of teaching us. It first takes away everything that we are not, so that only the essential remains. And it is precisely there, where nothing remains but you, that the question arises that opens the next part of my story. What if the respect I've always sought from the world could only come from within myself? When I finally realized that the respect I so desperately sought from the world could only begin within myself, something changed. But it wasn't a magical moment of enlightenment. It was more like a slow, uncomfortable awakening, full of silences and small pains. Because respecting oneself at first seems selfish. It seems harsh. It seems like you're disappointing others. And perhaps that's why so many people give up right at the beginning, because they confuse love with obedience, and they confuse kindness with a lack of boundaries. I've also given up a few times. The first was when I tried to say no to something I'd always accepted. It was a simple situation. A co-worker asked me to cover his shift for the third time that week. Before, I would have said sure, even exhausted. But that day I said, I can't today, I need to rest. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, almost offensive. He sighed and replied curtly, "Wow, you've really changed, huh?" And at that moment, I almost took it back. I almost apologized for choosing myself. That's when I realized how used to betraying myself I was. The real conflict isn't between you and the world. It's between who you are and who others expect you to remain. When you change, many distance themselves, not because you did something wrong, but because your new stance reveals how much they benefited from your silence. That hurts, but it's a necessary pain. Like a bone returning to its place. I started noticing how disrespect seeped into the little things. In the "I'll do it later" that kept me awake at night. In the "it's not that serious" that justified every time someone crossed my boundaries. And in the phrases I told myself, "Let it go. There's no point in arguing. It's just one more time." But every time I let it go, I left a piece of myself behind. And when I realized it, I was already living a life that didn't feel like mine. One day, my grandmother told me an old story. She said that each person is born with a lit candle inside them. At first, the flame is strong, pure, but as we grow, we let others blow out that light. One with criticism, another with contempt, another with habit. And there comes a time when the candle almost goes out. But, he would say, whoever learns to protect their flame will never again be in the dark. I didn't quite understand it at the time. Today I understand perfectly. All my life I let the outside winds extinguish what was inside me. Respecting yourself means learning to protect that flame. It means not allowing the wind of fear, guilt, or the need to please everyone to extinguish what keeps you alive. But this protection doesn't come from pretty words. It comes from setting limits. From the moment you decide you will no longer trade your peace to maintain a place that shrinks you. A friend of mine went through this in a way I'll never forget. She had worked for years in an office where she was treated as if she had no voice. She did twice as much work, but received half the pay. One day her boss called her replaceable. She swallowed it silently. The next day, she brought a cake to work, gave it to everyone and said, "Thank you for the lesson, but my story continues elsewhere." She left without having anything certain. A month later, she got a job at a company that valued her competence. When we met again, she told me, "It seems the world only respected me when I finally respected myself." That stuck with me. And I started to notice, how many times do we stay in places, relationships, projects, or habits just out of fear of disappointing someone? How many times do we say everything's fine when everything inside us screams the opposite? The truth is, the whole world changes when you change the tone of your inner voice. But the curious thing is that, in the beginning, nothing seems to change. You take a stand, you say what you feel, and the universe seems to test you. Silence comes distance, loneliness. The mind tries to deceive you, saying, "See, it was better when you were silent." But it is precisely in this journey that you are being rebuilt. You can't be reborn, surrounded by the same people, the same fears, and the same excuses. I remember one night in particular. I was lying there, staring at the ceiling, and I realized that for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to justify who I was. And it was a strange, almost frightening relief. Because when you start to respect yourself, silence changes its meaning. It ceases to be loneliness and becomes freedom. Self-respect is the beginning of a new language. You start to speak differently, walk differently, even breathe differently. People feel it even if you don't say anything. It's as if something invisible within you gains weight, as if your presence begins to occupy the space you previously gave to others. And that's when something curious happens. Those who have grown accustomed to your silence try to test you. They come with phrases disguised as affection, but full of guilt. "You've been acting strange. It's been colder lately. Do you think you're better now?" It's the world trying to see if you'll back down, if you'll become light enough to fit into other people's expectations. But a day comes, and it does, when you realize you no longer need to prove anything. Not that you're good, not that you're kind, not that you deserve to stay. You just need to be true to yourself. The rest will fall into place. And when that awareness is born, you begin to see the difference between loneliness and alignment. Loneliness is the gap between who you were and who you are becoming. It's a silence that frightens but also liberates. Life has taught me that respecting oneself is, above all, an act of faith. Because for a while everything seems to crumble, but what falls is only what never had a foundation. And what remains because it is real. It was at that point that I understood that self-respect is not the end of the road. It's the beginning, and it is in this beginning, between the fear of losing and the courage to continue, that the first sign of change emerges. But what happens next, when the world realizes that you no longer accept less than you deserve? That's when the most surprising part of this journey begins. You know, when you start to respect yourself and realize that something changes, even if nothing seems different. People look at you differently, your voice sounds firmer, and even silence begins to have a different weight. It's subtle, almost invisible, but the world responds. And that response is the first sign that something profound has begun to move. Self-respect has a power that few understand. It alters the way the universe communicates with you. In Jewish tradition, there is an ancient word, kavod. It is translated as respect, but its true meaning is wait. And that changes everything. To respect oneself is, literally, to give weight to one's own existence. It is to leave behind the dangerous lightness of those who live at the mercy of others' opinions and become solid, real, unshakable. Because those who do not value themselves are too light, and the winds of circumstance carry them in any direction. But those who know their own worth have gravity, and the world must adjust to their presence. But have you ever stopped to think about how that inner weight is created? It doesn't come with diplomas. It doesn't come with fame. It doesn't come with praise. A person's weight is born from consistency. When your words, your actions, and your feelings go hand in hand, something inside you aligns. You cease to be a jumble of desires and become a presence. And that's what the world respects, not what you say, but what you radiate. One day I realized this difference in the most unexpected way. I worked for a man who loved to control others, always impatient, always demanding, always pushing the boundaries. For a long time, I accepted it. I thought I needed to prove my worth. I did more than was asked of me, stayed late, remained silent in the face of criticism. Until one day, after an exhausting week, he gave me yet another task in a hurry. I took a deep breath and calmly said, "Not today. My time is valuable." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. I expected an attack, a humiliation. But he just looked at me and replied, "Okay, we'll talk tomorrow." It was one of the strangest moments of my life. I expected conflict and received respect. That's when I realized the world respects those who respect themselves, even when it doesn't like it. What I once feared, being rejected, transformed into something greater, being recognized. Have you ever noticed how the people we admire most have something in common? They don't beg for acceptance. They don't chase after love, approval, or attention. They are simply there, whole. There is a silent authority about them. And this authority comes from a very simple place. They know who they are. But what happens when someone who has always been submissive begins to straighten up? The atmosphere changes. Some distance themselves, others get irritated, and few truly get closer. Because self-respect is a mirror. It shows others where they themselves are betraying themselves. And not everyone is ready to see that. A friend once told me that strong people are intimidating because they remind others of what they haven't yet achieved. And perhaps that's true. When you begin to respect yourself, much of what surrounds you crumbles. Friendships, habits, routines, even thoughts. It's as if your inner world is being rebuilt. What lacks structure falls apart. And what is true remains. But then a question arises. Are we prepared for the weight of being ourselves? Because being authentic requires courage. It's easier to be light, malleable, invisible. Lightness pleases, weight bothers. But it is weight that gives you shape, purpose, and presence. During that transition period, I felt this struggle constantly. One side of me wanted to go back to pleasing others, to be the good guy, the one who never creates problems. The other side, new, firm, but still insecure, whispered, "Don't go back to where they belittle you." And this internal battle was exhausting. Until one day, while walking alone at night, I realized something. The pain of being true to yourself is fleeting. The pain of betraying yourself lasts a lifetime. When I started choosing myself, something curious happened. Situations that used to scare me began to dissolve. Conflicts resolved themselves, doors opened, different people came closer. It was as if the universe had been waiting for the moment when I assumed my own stance to start collaborating. And suddenly, everything that had seemed like bad luck began to make sense. But make no mistake, respecting yourself doesn't mean always winning. It means keeping your head held high even when everything seems to go wrong. It's understanding that value lies not in the result, but in consistency. It's having the courage to say, "I don't know, I don't want to, I can't," and remain at peace. Have you ever noticed how tired people who lack self-respect are? Tired of trying to be what others expect, tired of fixing what wasn't their fault, tired of explaining what doesn't need explaining. Disrespect consumes energy. Self-respect, on the other hand, restores strength. Because when you stop justifying yourself, you start to truly breathe. A rabbi once said something I've never forgotten. A man without self-respect is like a leaf in the wind. Beautiful, light, but directionless. And that's exactly it. When you lack inner weight, any opinion drags you down, any criticism destroys you, any praise molds you. But when you anchor yourself in self-respect, the world can scream outside, and yet there is still silence within you. It was at that point that I understood what my grandfather meant when he said that respect is the foundation of the soul. Because without that foundation, every achievement collapses. You can have money, fame, love, followers. If you don't have self-respect, everything is unstable. But with it, even loss transforms into learning. And perhaps that's why, when I began to carry this new weight, the weight of knowing myself, the world stopped testing me. Life seemed to say, "Now you understand. Now I can trust you." But there's a secret that almost no one tells you. When you finally gain that inner strength, it starts attracting different things. More honest people, more coherent opportunities, paths that previously seemed impossible. And that's no coincidence. It's simply the invisible law of life. That which has value always finds that which is capable of recognizing it. And that's where the next question comes in, the one that changes everything. If self-respect transforms us from within, what happens when we learn to transform what's outside? Relationships, time, choices, with that same principle. Because it's at that point that respect ceases to be just a posture and becomes a new way of living. There's a curious moment in the process of learning to respect yourself. The instant you realize you're not the same person anymore, but you don't yet know who you've become. It's like crossing a bridge between the old and the new without seeing the other side. In that space, the world seems to test you. People drift away, situations that seemed stable begin to crumble, and you wonder if you made the right choice. Discomfort is inevitable, but it's not a punishment. It's just the price of leaving behind a life where you were invisible. Once, a rabbi told me an old story about value and perception. A young disciple came to his master and said, "No one respects me. Everyone treats me as if I were worthless." The rabbi then handed him a gold coin and said, "Go to the market and find out how much they offer you for it, but don't accept less than a silver coin." The young man went. The vendors laughed at him. "That's just a common coin," they said. He returned sad, believing his master was wrong. The rabbi smiled and said, "Now go to the jeweler." The jeweler looked at it, weighed it, and said, "I'll pay 10 silver coins for it." The master then replied, "See, to discover its value, go where they know how to recognize value." This story, which seems simple, carries a profound truth. It is not the gold that changes, but the eye of the beholder. Recent research in social psychology shows that how people treat you is directly linked to the image you project of yourself. Studies from Stanford University revealed that individuals with a more upright and firm body posture are perceived as 27% more confident and competent, even before they open their mouths. This isn't about appearance, it's about energy. The body speaks what the soul believes. When you begin to respect yourself, your body changes without you realizing it. Your gaze becomes more direct, your gestures slower, your silence more present. It's as if the world begins to listen to you even when you don't speak. But there's an important detail. When you start to value yourself, the universe needs to rebalance everything around you. People who were by your side out of convenience move away. Environments that once seemed safe become uncomfortable. And it's at this point that many people backtrack. Because the mind tries to convince you that losing is the same as making a mistake. But not every loss is an end. Sometimes it's a purification. When you decide to respect yourself, what doesn't have the same weight falls away, and what remains takes root. Once, I received a message from a woman who had attended a lecture on self-esteem. She said, "I spent 15 years married to someone who said he loved me, but belittled me with every word. One day I heard you say, 'Respect is the oxygen of love.' And I realized I was suffocating. The next day, I decided to leave. Today, I live in a small apartment, but I can finally breathe." Her words struck me more than any applause, because respect is not a luxury, it's a biological necessity. Without it, the soul sickens. In fact, neuroscience research indicates that situations of humiliation and disrespect activate the same areas of the brain associated with physical pain. It's as if the body understands contempt as an invisible burn. And when this pain is repeated for a long time, it transforms into something deeper: shame. Shame destroys identity from the inside out, silently. Therefore, recovering self-respect is not just an emotional choice, it's a neurological cure. It's about reprogramming the brain to believe in one's own worth again. But why is it so difficult to leave a place where we are disrespected? Because the habit of diminishing oneself creates dependence. The mind gets used to the predictability of suffering. Even when unhappy, you know what to expect, and the unknown seems more frightening than familiar pain. So when someone finally stands up and says, "Enough," it seems like a heroic act, and in a way, it is. Because true heroism is rarely found in grand battles, but in the small daily decisions not to betray oneself. I experienced something similar years ago. I worked in an environment where emotional abuse was disguised as professional demands. The pressure was constant, the comparisons inevitable. I told myself I was resilient, but the truth is I was being complicit. Until one day, during a meeting, I heard a phrase that struck me. If you want to be valued, learn not to sell yourself cheaply. It wasn't said to me, but at that moment, I knew it was meant for me. I left that company the following month, scared, but also with a strange sense of relief. 3 months later, I received a better offer, in a place where I was respected from day one. Sometimes, life only opens the right door when you close the wrong one. And if this pattern repeats itself so many times, is it a coincidence? Maybe not. Perhaps there's a kind of invisible law governing value. The world can only offer you what it believes you accept, not what you desire, but what you demonstrate acceptance of. That's why, when you change how you treat yourself, your surroundings need to reorganize themselves. Everything that isn't on the same frequency breaks down. But the most beautiful thing happens later, when you understand that respect isn't something you earn, it's something you practice. It doesn't begin when someone acknowledges you, but when you recognize your own limits. Every time you say no to something that hurts you, you say yes to the life that belongs to you. And it is in this simple gesture that the true inner revolution resides. Ultimately, self-respect means remembering every day that your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's opinion. It's understanding that gold remains gold, even when the market ignores it, and that the silence of those who leave is often the beginning of the music of those who are reunited. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all is this: when you finally learn to recognize your own worth, the world slowly begins to reflect that brilliance back. New people appear, opportunities arise, doors open. But it's not luck, it's harmony. Because the universe always rewards those who have learned not to sell themselves for less than their worth. Respecting yourself isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. It's a silent exercise built on small choices, the conversations you have with yourself, and the invisible boundaries you learn to draw. When I started applying this, I realized that self-respect doesn't come from grand gestures, but from micro decisions, those that almost no one sees. Saying no to something that hurts you, getting up from a table where there's no reciprocity, choosing silence when before you tried to justify yourself. The world doesn't change suddenly, but something inside you changes forever. At first, I thought self-respect was just about attitude, speaking firmly, appearing confident, setting boundaries. But I discovered it's deeper than that. It's about how you think when no one is watching. It's about the words you use to describe yourself, the thoughts you nurture, the small concessions you disguise as patience. Because the truth is, how you talk to yourself sets the tone for your life. If you call yourself weak every day, the world will hear you that way. If you demand more of yourself every day than you allow yourself to be, the world will demand more of you that too. One day, I decided to observe what I was saying to myself. It was like tuning into a radio full of interference. I kept repeating old phrases, inherited from others. You're not enough. You need to prove yourself. You can't make mistakes. And I realized it was impossible to expect respect from the world while I was attacking myself every day. So I began a small inner revolution. I started replacing each critical phrase with one of presence. I'm learning. I can try again. I deserve to rest. At first, it seemed artificial, as if I were lying to myself. But over time, something changed. The words began to take root. Studies confirm this. Researchers at Yale University have shown that self-talk has a direct impact on cortisol levels, the stress hormone. People who treat themselves with more compassion have up to 23% less emotional reactivity in stressful situations. This means that the way you talk to yourself literally reprograms your body. It's not philosophy, it's biology. Respecting yourself is also about regulating your nervous system, teaching your brain not to live in a state of permanent alert. But it's not just about how you think. Self-respect is also manifested in the time you choose to dedicate to yourself. How many times do you say yes for fear of seeming selfish? How many hours of your week are spent on things that add nothing to your life? When you give your time to everything and everyone except yourself, the world understands that your time has no value. It was difficult to understand this. I thought that saying no was rejecting, but I discovered that it's about selecting. Every no you say to others is a yes you say to your own life. A simple example: I used to accept commitments even when I was exhausted. I thought it was kindness, but it was self-neglect. One day, I declined an invitation and for the first time was honest. I can't today. I need time for myself. The silence on the other end seemed to condemn that choice. But what happened next surprised me. The person replied, "That's okay. Actually, I should do that too." And I realized that when you respect yourself, you give permission for others to do the same. But there's an even greater challenge: stopping the search for validation. We live in an era where value is measured by likes, praise, and approval. And that's dangerous because it accustoms us to depending on the gaze of others to exist. But true respect is born in the dark where no one applauds. It's when you choose to be true to yourself, even if no one sees. It's when you follow the right path, even without witnesses. That's integrity. It's the kind of strength that isn't shown off, but endures. I remember a woman I met at a lecture. She told me, "I stopped looking for love and started treating myself with love." Today, she lives a relationship she never imagined possible, not because she found someone perfect, but because she learned not to accept less than she deserves. The energy you emit changes the type of person you are drawn to. It's almost mathematical. Those who live in neediness attract mirrors of neediness. Those who live in value attract mirrors of value. I also had to learn about this in relationships. Self-respect changes the kind of love you accept. It's no longer the love that promises you the world, but the love that looks you in the eyes and sees you completely. Sometimes that means leaving. And leaving isn't giving up. It's choosing to keep growing, even if in a different direction. Loving someone shouldn't cost you anything. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that self-respect is contagious. When you start treating yourself with more care, the environment around you responds. Different people approach you. Conversations change tone. Chaos diminishes. Even your body notices. You sleep better, eat better, breathe differently. Self-respect creates harmony inside and out. But this doesn't happen overnight. There are relapses, doubts, and moments when you'll want to go back to pleasing others. And that's okay. Respecting yourself isn't about never losing yourself. It's about learning to return to yourself every time. It's about recognizing when you've crossed the line and forgiving yourself for it. It's about being your own harbor, even when the sea is rough. I know it can seem difficult. There will be days when you feel alone, misunderstood, questioning whether it's all worth it. But that's precisely where self-respect solidifies, when you choose to stay true to yourself, even without guaranteed reward. Life has a mysterious way of testing our convictions before rewarding us for them. Ultimately, self-respect is an act of love. It's the beginning of all true change. When you start living with this awareness, the world no longer needs to convince you of your worth. You feel it. And the respect that comes from the outside becomes merely a reflection of what already exists within. And if there's a secret to this process, perhaps it's this: everything you seek begins with how you treat yourself. Respect, love, peace. Nothing comes from the outside if there's still scarcity within. When you change your inner dialogue, you change your destiny. And it's at that point that respect ceases to be a beautiful idea and becomes a living practice. It's the moment when you realize you no longer need to chase after anything, because everything that is yours begins silently to chase after you. There comes a point when words are no longer enough. You listen, you understand, you agree, but you still feel that something inside you hasn't fully shifted. It's as if your mind says, "I know," while your heart still asks, "What now?" The truth is, self-respect isn't built with inspirational phrases. It's born from practice. And every practice begins with a silent decision to no longer betray yourself. If you've made it this far, it's because something within you has already understood. You've realized that constantly diminishing yourself isn't humility, it's forgetfulness. That enduring what hurts you isn't patience, it's fear. And that loving another can never mean abandoning what makes you whole. Now is the time to transform understanding into action. And that requires courage. Because self-respect isn't born from a single grand gesture, but from 100 small choices made every day. Start simple. For the next 7 days, observe how you talk to yourself. The words you use when you make a mistake, when you're tired, when you feel inadequate. Notice if the tone is supportive or aggressive. Write it down. Make visible what usually happens in silence. Then, consciously choose to change one phrase a day. Replace, "I'm not capable" with, "I'm still learning." And replace, "I messed everything up" with, "I did the best I could." It may seem like a small thing, but that's how the brain learns to listen to you in a new way. Next, move on to the second step, protecting your time. Make a list of everything you've been doing purely out of emotional obligation. How many of these things truly have meaning? How many are simply attempts to please others or avoid guilt? Apply the 3 yes rule. If something doesn't make you say a physical, mental, and emotional yes, it's a disguised no. Start respecting that no. Use it without anger, but firmly. You don't need to explain everything. Respect is communicated better through behavior than justifications. The third practice is perhaps the most challenging. Not seeking validation. Try doing something just for yourself. Read a book, take a walk, write, create, without posting, without telling anyone, without expecting recognition. Do it and keep it. This is training your inner power. When you don't need to be seen to exist, the whole world begins to perceive your presence differently. Because those who don't beg for light inevitably become a source of it. There is also the practice of silence. Choose a moment of the day. 10 minutes is enough to be in total stillness. No music, no phone, no noise. At first, the silence will seem uncomfortable, almost threatening. But after a few days, you will begin to hear something that has always been there. Your own voice. It is with this voice that respect begins to grow, because it is what reminds you of who you are when the world tries to confuse you. These small practices take root, and when self-respect takes root, life begins to flourish in a new way. The people around you change, opportunities realign, and the chaos that once surrounded you begins to lose its power. It's not a coincidence, it's consistency. Everything that is true organizes itself around those who respect themselves. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this process is understanding that self-respect doesn't separate you from others. It connects you in a purer way. Because when you learn to respect yourself, you also learn to respect the time and boundaries of others. Empathy ceases to be an effort and becomes a consequence. Kindness ceases to be a defense and becomes nature. What I want you to understand is that self-respect is the invisible foundation of everything that endures. Without it, any achievement crumbles. With it, even the simplest things become grand. It is the ground upon which peace is built. And if there is a secret to a lighter and more dignified life, it is this: there is no path that leads you to happiness if it requires you to lose yourself. So, if something inside you was awakened by all this, don't let that feeling fade when the video ends. Turn it into action. Choose one action, just one, and practice it today. It could be a different phrase, a gentle refusal, a moment of silence, a compliment to yourself in front of the mirror. Do something that says, even without words, "I deserve to be well." Over time, these small decisions come together and build a new reality. You'll realize that self-respect is a kind of magnetic field. Everything that doesn't do you good starts to move away naturally, and everything that is in tune with your worth starts to come closer. This isn't magic, it's alignment. It's the universe responding to the new way you treat yourself, and when that alignment happens, you won't need to chase after anything anymore. You'll just walk, and what's meant for you will find you. Now, I want to ask you something. If these words touched you, if they sparked reflection or gave you the courage to take a small step, please subscribe to the channel. Not just to follow new videos, but to continue this journey of self-discovery and inner dignity with me. Like this video, it helps spread this message to more people who need to hear the same thing right now. And if you want, share your experience in the comments. It can be anonymous. Sometimes, a simple story can illuminate someone's path. Remember, respect begins within. And the day you learn to treat yourself with dignity, the whole world will start treating you that way too. Because nothing is more powerful than a human being who finally understands their own worth and has the courage to live it.